Welcome to LiveDaf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Kufke. We have 5 lines from the top. Says the Gemara, Zeh HaKlal. We're going back to our Mishnah, which told us that if a person does a malacha, u'malachto miskayemes, it has endurance, it's considered to be a malacha. Rashi explained the word miskayemes to mean that there are some people who would just leave it as is, meaning although he intends on adding to it to proceed with his malacha, but since he got to the point where some people would just leave it as is, would deem it to be sufficient. Therefore, it is regarded as a malacha and is chayiv. And the Mishnah used the term zeh haklal, this general rule. Says the Gemara, zeh haklal lasuye mai. What is this term zeh haklal coming to include? What type of scenario are we coming to include? Says the Gemara, lasuye, we're coming to include the chak kfiza, if a person engraved, he carved out. Kfiza bekaba. Kaba is a large block of wood, in which one plans to carve out a large cavity to contain a kav, and he didn't get to that point. He only carved out kfiza, which is 3/4 of a kav. So although he intends on adding to his malacha, he was only chak, he only carved out ikfiza, 3/4. That is considered to be a sufficient malacha. Why? Because some people will just leave it as is. Therefore, this is considered to be a malacha. Continues the Gemara. Rab Shimon Gamliel Omer, Afamake bekurnos ala sadan. Also, one who blows with his kurnos, with his hammer, on this sadan, which is this block of metal, he has done a malacha. Says the Gemara, Maika Avid, what malacha has he done? So the Mishnah tells us that he is being makah bekurnos b'shas malacha is chayiv. Now, what did he do wrong by banging on this metal anvil? Rabbi Rav Yosef Damar Tavayu, they both explain as follows. Because he's training his hand. He's training how to apply those blows properly. So it's a training process, and therefore he's chayiv. Says the Gemara, Kashaba b'nei Rechava. So the b'nei Rechava, the children of Rechava, had difficulty with this explanation. Is this a malacha? Elamiata. So if this is the case, if so, chaza umnasa b'shabata. Let's say a person is observing a craftsman at work. The Gomar, and by observing him, he learned the craft, he learns the trade. Are you going to propose that in this case as well, he's liable, he brings a chatas? What malacha did he do? So in this case as well, when he's simply training his hand, what type of malacha is that? They both explain as follows. Yes, this is a malacha. Shekain, since miradade tase mishkan oisinkain, because the miradadim, those who flattened out, who pounded those tase mishkan, those gold plates used in the mishkan construction they used to cover the krashim with it, so they would follow this procedure. Let's take a look at Rashi, who explains this in detail. Rashi here is 14 lines from the top, beginning with the words miradade tase mishkan. Litzipui krashim, they would use these gold plates as a plating for the krashim. Oisin kain, they would follow in this manner. Makin gimel alatas, they would alternate. They would begin by applying 3 blows on this plate. Va'achas ala sadan, they would move over to the sadan, to this anvil, to this block of metal, and they would apply a blow with their hammer on the sadan. Why? Lahachlika kurnas, to smooth out the hammer. Shaloi yivakeya hatas shudak, so it doesn't go ahead and split, puncture, fracture the tas, the plate, which is very thin. So this is part of the process. 3 on the gold, 1 on the kurnas. So indeed, the Rishon Gamliel holds that this is considered to be part of the process of the malacha. And since he's smoothing out his hammer in this manner, it's considered to be makah b'patish. He's putting the finishing touches, he's improving his hammer. So this was reminiscent of what they did in the Mishkan. This is considered to be a proper malacha. Rashi concludes, and I observed that the bali matbeya, the coin minters in my place, would follow this procedure. So if Shimon holds this is considered to be a malacha, he's improving the quality of his hammer, and indeed we find a precedent to this in the Mishkan. Let's get back to the Gemara. Tani nami hachi. We have a brisa which tells us likewise, also one who blows with the kurnas on the sadan during the malacha chayav shekain mirada de tase mishkan, because the pounders of the plates in the mishkan oisin kain would follow this procedure. Continues the Mishnah, chayrish kolshu, if one plows, even a kolshu is sufficient for the malacha and his chayav. Hamanakish, if he weeds, v'mekarsem, he prunes the tree from its dry branches. V'mezaret, he prunes the shoots, the overload of branches on the trees. It's too many branches, so he overloads these fresh shoots. He prunes these fresh shoots. So in this case, even a small amount, kolshu, is chayav. Now what malacha did he do here? So Manakish is actually a malacha of chayrish because he's improving the soil by weeding it. Mekarsim is actually a tilada of zireh because he's improving the growth of the tree. So even a small amount is chayiv. Continues the Mishnah, Hamalakat eitzim, one gathers branches. Imlis sakin, if it's improving the tree, for instance, he's cutting off a live tree, by doing so he's improving the tree. Kolshen, and even a small amount, he's doing a malacha, which malacha, once again, by improving the tree, is doing a malacha to let of zireah. In lehesek, if the intended purpose here is to be used for firewood, then we have a different shir, kedei lavashel beitzakala. He needs to gather the amount which is necessary to fuel, to cook up a beitzakala, easily cooked egg, which is a chicken egg, and as Rashi points out, not the entire egg, but even a portion, a gregerous portion of the egg, the volume which equals a dried fig of this egg. Concludes the Mishnah, Hamalakat eitzim, a similar halacha regarding collecting grasses, im lesakein, if it is affecting improvement. Then kolshu, even a small amount, is considered to be a malacha, he's improving the quality of the soil. Im lebehema, if it's intended for animal feed, then kimloi piagdi, the amount necessary to fill a mouthful of a gdi, of a goat. Continues the Gemara. The Mishnah began by telling us, chorish kolshu, a person plows even a small amount. He has done a malacha. Says the Gemara, lamai chazi, what is it fit for? What do you accomplish? Even just a small hole, what is it good for? Says the Gemara, chazi lebizra, it is suitable to be used for a bizra, one seed, the core of a pumpkin. You can plant a seed of a pumpkin in a small furrow. The Kavasagam and Mishkan, likewise you find a precedent by the Mishkan, Shekain Roy, Lekalach Echad, because even a small furrow is suitable to plant in it a kelach echad. Kelach means a stalk, meaning to plant a seed for one stalk. Shall samana, of the dye, of the herbs needed for the dyeing of the materials. So this is deemed significant and sufficient shear for the malacha of cherish. Continues the Gemara, Hamanachesh, Hamakarzem, Hamazare, Tanraban, we learned in the Bryce. Ha-toilish ocean, one who plucks endives, Hamazaret zrodem, he cuts off these reeds. Let's take a look at Rashi, who gives us the background here. Rashi here is right on the off to the right, exactly in the middle of the Amid, beginning with the word ocean. Asef shekar and krishpil, which is interpreted as being translated as being endives. Zerodin, says Rashi, min kanamim, it is a certain type of reeds. Now, depending on the stage of these the reeds, that's what they would use it for, depending where it's holding. But rakim, when they're still fresh and soft, so they're cut for, or harvested for human consumption. They're edible. Niskashumat, they get a bit hardened. And then they're standing to be used for animal feed. Yavshu, they dry completely. They stand to be used for fuel. Let's get back to the brisa, which will give us the various shiurim depending on the stage of these products. Says the brisa once again, Atoilish Ulshin, Vamazar Zrodem, so endives or these reeds. So Imla Achila, if they're at the point that they are suitable for human consumption, they're edible kigageris, then the shear here is for the malacha is a shear gageris, dry fig. Imla Behema, if they're intended for animal feed, Kimloi Piagdi. So in that case, we work with a shear, a mouthful of a goat, because they're already of the dry variety, and they're meant to be used for animal feed. So we have a different shear. Imla hesek, if they're completely dried up now, they're intended to be used for fuel. Kedei lavashel beitzakala, then the shear here is sufficient to cook up this chicken egg. Imla yapris is a karka. If the intended purpose is to improve the karka by plucking these things out, then kol shein, even a small amount, is sufficient. Says the Gemara, So what about in the previous cases? If he is cutting it for machal adam or for machal behema, or for to be used for hesek, for fuel, in those cases as well, isn't he improving the ground along the way? Atu kulu. Are all those cases not aren't they coming to improve the ground as well? So even though that's not his intention, but it's happening, so why don't we apply a small shear even in those cases, since it's improving the ground? Even a kosher should be sufficient. Says there are two answers. Rabbi Rav Yosef Damer Tavai, they both answered. V'agam Shana, we're speaking about a swamp which is fertile enough, and this is not considered to be an improvement on the quality. Abai Amar, afilu tema besoda. Even if you say we're speaking about a field, the lav agam, which is not a swamp. Ukegoyin, for instance, like a machavan, he has no intention to improve the land. So it's a davar she'einu miskaven. It's an incidental malacha which is happening as a result, as a consequence of his gathering this for human consumption, for animal feed. So we don't reckon with that secondary malacha that's taking place. He has no kavanah. Says the Gemara, Abai and Rabbi both tell us, Reb Shimon would concede to Rabbi Yehuda that even a davar she'ein miskaven is asur in a case where it's a psik reisha v'lo it's a mashal. Go cut off the head of a chicken and have it remain alive. Psik reisha, cut off the head v'lo it won't die. Meaning, when something is inevitable, you have to reckon with it. Here, the improvement of the land is inevitable. It's an inevitable result of his activity. So this is included in his malacha. You have to reckon with it. Says apparently we're speaking about the ka'avid ba'ar de chavrei. The brisa is only needed in a case where he is doing this ba'ar de chavrei. He's doing it in his friend's land, his friend's farm. Rashi says lo yichpas le'liyapo. He has no personal benefit. He doesn't care that it's getting improved. So since he has no personal benefit, we don't reckon with it, and it's not part of the equation. Okay, so in summary, the Mishnah told us that if one is choresh, even a small amount, he's doing a malacha because it is suitable for one seed, and therefore the shear is kosher. What about cutting all these different types of items, branches, grass, endives, reeds? So the Gemara gave us that distinction, depending what the intent is. If the point is for human consumption, then the shear is gergeres. If the point is for animal consumption, the shear is a mouthful of a goat. If the point is for fuel, then we work with a shear that is sufficient to cook up a beitza kala. And if the point is to improve the land, improve the tree, then we work with a small shear of a kosher, even a minute amount. Continues the Gemara, if one writes two letters, so this is the malacha v'akosev, bein minoi, whether using his right hand, bein mismoilo or his left, bein mishum echad, whether both of them are the same character. For instance, Rashi says he writes two aleph, bein mishtei shemos, or there are different characters. He writes an aleph and a base. Bein mishtei samonios, or using two different types of ink. Rashi says, for instance, one red and one black. B'chol lashon, any language, chayav. Amar b'yos lo yichivu. The Chachamim did not hold him liable. The Chachamim did not declare that there's a chiyuv by two oisis. Ela mishum roishim, on account of. It is only on account of marking. What does he mean? Shekach korsvin al karshe mishkan. Because this is the way they would write. They would mark on the boards of the mishkan. They wouldn't write letters. They would merely write a symbol, a mark. Leida ezoi ben zuga, to know with the how to pair the crush them together. They wanted to erect them the same way, so they made marks to see which one would belong next to the other. So he basically disagrees. He holds we don't need specifically letters for the malacha of kais. Even a symbol, even a mark is sufficient, because the malacha of kais is based on what they did in the Mishkan, and they simply mark the krushim. So even a mark is considered significant and is doing the malacha of kais. Amar B'Yehuda, Matzinu, we find, Shem Katan M'Shem Gadol, even a small word, which is part of a larger word, that is sufficient. For instance, Shemi Shimon. If a person intended on writing Shimon, a full word, Shimon, a long word, and he merely wrote the first two letters, Shin and Mem. So it's a small word which is part of a big word. He's already chayiv because the letters Shin Mem have significance, have meaning. In this case, actually the name of a person, one of Noach's sons, Shem Cham and Yafes. So even a small word, which is a part of a big word, is sufficient. Or he wrote Shem from the word Shmuel. So either or Shem, Yishimon, or Mishmuel, or Noach. He wrote the two letters Nun Ches, Minochar, when he intended on writing Nochar, or Don Midaniel, or God Megadil, that is sufficient, and he's chayiv. Let's take a look at Rashi inside. Beginning from the beginning of the Mishnah, which is 28 lines from the bottom. Beginning with the words Bein Mishem Echad. So the Tanakama told us if he writes two letters, if they're both the same character, Shneim Alfin, if there are two olives, Mishtei Shemus, or they're two different characters, two different letters, for instance, Aleph and a Beis. Mishtei Shamaniyos, two different types of ink, Achas B'Dyoy, one using black ink, Achas B'Sikra, one using red color. B'chol Loshen, Shel Kol Ksovim, V'Gufan Shekalum Avoma, any type of alphabet, any type of characters of any nation. So this is the Tanakama who insists on characters of alphabet. But if it's not an alphabet, then there's no chiv. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. He says even a mark is sufficient. Mishum Roishim, because the whole entire concept is based on what they did in the Mishkan, and it is based on the concept of Roishim, of marking. Siman Shoyu Oisim Bekarsha Mishkan. This was a mark that they made on the crushing of the Mishkan because they used to dismantle. And then when they will reconstruct it, they didn't want to mix up the Seder, the order. Therefore, they used to make these marks. So Rabbi Yossi is coming to say that even if you didn't write an actual letter, but merely mark down two markings, for a mark, for a sign, chayv. Rabbi Yehuda concludes by saying, we find even a small word, which is a part of a larger word. Ha'asal ashminim. Rabbi Yehuda is coming to teach us that even though he didn't complete his malacha, he intended on writing a large word because of miktsas, and he only wrote a part of it. Now that part, it's viable, it's readable, it makes sense, then he's chayiv. So even though he didn't complete his intention, since he did something significant, what he did has significance, has viability, it has meaning elsewhere, then he's chayiv. Let's see the Gemara. The Mishnah began by saying if he writes, whether using his right or left hand, is chayiv. We understand when a person uses his right hand, is chayiv. This is the normal way of writing. But when he uses his left, why is he chayiv? This is not a normal way of writing. We're speaking about a person who's a lefty. So his left hand is considered like our right hand, and therefore he's chayiv using his left. Says the Gemara, okay, I understand why using his left would be chayiv. But why if the lefty uses his right hand, would he be chayiv? But his left hand should be equated, should be tantamount, like everybody else's right hand, and he's chayiv. Using his left hand, he should be chayiv. But if he uses his right hand is like an ordinary person's left hand. So he shouldn't be chayiv. So how can the Mishnah say whether he uses his right or his left, he's chayiv? Ella, says the Gemara, Abai, we're speaking about an ambidextrous, a person who uses both hands equally. So in his case, certainly, whether he uses his right or his hand, he has done the malacha in its proper manner, its unusual manner. It's considered a derech ksiva, and is chayiv. Rabbi Yaakov, Braid Bas Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov, the son of the daughter of Yaakov, said as follows: Hamani Rabbi Yossi. The Mishnah here is reflecting the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, the Amar who said, "Lo yichiv shtei oisius el mishum roishim." The whole concept of the chiv of two oisius, they did not hold a person liable for writing those two letters only on account of roishim. It's based on the concept of marking, because they used to mark in the Mishkan on the Krushim. Now, although If a person uses his left hand to write, it's not considered to be derech ksiva, but certainly it could be considered to be roishim, marking. A person can properly mark with his left hand, so therefore, even if he writes with his left hand, he's chayiv. Continues the Gemara, how could you say that the Reisha, the opening clause of the Mishnah, reflects Rabbi Yossi's opinion? Vaha mid sefer Rabbi Yossi. Since the sefer is Rabbi Yossi, Reisha lav Rabbi Yossi. Apparently, the opening portion of the Mishnah is not following Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Says Merkula Rabbi Yossi. Yes, everything is following Rabbi Yossi's opinion. The Reisha and the continuation of the Mishnah, where Rabbi Yossi says the whole concept is based on Reishim. So the opening portion of the Mishnah is reflecting the Shita of Rabbi Yossi as well. Continues the Gemara. Matzina, we find a small word which is made from a larger word. And the Mishnah gives us examples. For instance, he's writing Shimon. He begins by writing the Shin and the Mem. So this has significance, this has meaning. So although he didn't complete everything he intended on writing, this is considered to be a sufficient malach. Now, the fact that the Rabbi Yehuda cites these examples of Shem from Shimon or Noach from Nochar, it appears that he requires that these two letters, the short word of Shem, should be comprised of two different types of letters, Shin and Mem. But perhaps if he is writing a large word and he only writes a portion of it, and that small portion contains only, say, two letters which are identical to each other. For instance, he intends on writing the word Sheshach, Rashi brings an example, and he only writes the first two letters, which is Shesh. So they are the same two alphabets, both of them are shins. He won't be chayiv. Let's see the Gemara. El Rabbi Yehuda shtei oisis. Ve'ei shnei shemus u'du mechayiv. Rabbi Yossi is only speaking about two. Rabbi Yehuda is only speaking about two letters, which are two different types of letters. Only then will he be chayiv in this case, when it is a part of a larger word. But shtei oisis, if those two letters are the same, ve'ei shem echad, they are the identical letters, lo mechayiv, he won't be chayiv. So again, if he wants to write Sheshach and he only writes the first two letters Shesh, that is not sufficient. That's not enough of variety. We have a brisa which seems to indicate otherwise. Rabbi Yehuda tells us that even in this case, you'd be chayiv. The Gemara is going to bring the entire brisa with the various shitos, and ultimately we're going to have a kasha from the Rabbi Yehuda of our Mishnah and the Rabbi Yehuda and the brisa. Continues the Gemara V'atani, haven't we learned in the brisa? Va'asa achas. The pasuk says, Va'asa me achas mehena. Person will do from one of these malachos. So the pasuk says me achas. The Gemara is going to make a drasha. If it would only say Va'asa achas, he did one, that would imply that he did the entire malacha. Perhaps I think he's only chayiv if he writes the entire word. He intended on writing Shimon, he's only chayiv until he completes Shimon. Until he weaves the entire garment. He fashions the entire sieve. That's what the pasuk says, me'achas, from the malach. It doesn't need to do the whole malach. If we interpret me'achas literally, he only needs to do part of the malacha. I would think to say, even if he only writes one letter, only weaves one thread. He only constructs one of the bayis, one of the bottom of the nafa. So Rashi explains that the nafa, the sieve, was woven with reeds. So what they used to do is they used to set up the structure, the frame of the sieve prior to actually weaving it. So they used to have the vertical reeds, and then they used to cross one on the bottom horizontally and one reed on top horizontally. This would begin the structure, would establish the basic structure of the frame, so they can go ahead and proceed with the weaving. So this is the bottom, the houses, the bottom one and the top one. So if you only did one, it has no viability, it falls apart if he only has one on top or on bottom. So perhaps even by doing one bayis b'nafa, that is sufficient, because the pasuk says me'achas, only a part. Talmud loymar, that's why the pasuk needs to say achas. So we seem to have a conflicting implication. It says achas, which denotes the entire thing, and we have me'achas, even partial. Ha ketzat. If so, how is this going to work out? He needs to do something significant. He needs to write at least a small word from a big word. a shem katan, a small word, out of a large word, mishem gadol. For instance, shem, mishimon, if he intended on writing shimon, he merely wrote shem, that is sufficient. Umishmul, or he wrote shem from the word shmul, or noyach from the word minachar, or dan from Daniel, or God migadil. So, neither of these cases, this is considered to be a melacha shlema. This word that he wrote shem, although this wasn't what he intended on writing, he didn't complete his plans. He intended on writing a full word shimon, but the word shem has meaning, has significance, has viability. So this is mei achas and he's chayiv. Likewise, when it comes to weaving, when it comes to forming the sieve, if he weaves two threads, two horizontals along the verticals of the beged, or he makes those two bottom, the reed on top and the reed on bottom, that is sufficient. Rashi will explain why. Let's take a look at Rashi inside. From the top, Talmud loima achas on the top line, shtei melacha shleima makam achar. He needs to do achas, meaning he doesn't need to do the entire project that he had in mind here, but he needs to do something of significance which is considered to be a full malacha elsewhere at least, meaning has viability. It's considered, it's reckoned with. Shem is Shimon, because the word Shem has meaning. Continues Rashi, look at a beged nami, shnei chutim, two threads, ubenafa with the sieve, shnei batim, shemekayim kach. People will leave it as is. Why? The person doesn't go weave his entire garment in one day, or form his entire fashion his entire sieve in one shot. He begins, he does somewhat of an amount so that it could stay, it's viable, if it doesn't fall apart on its own. So these are shiurim which are chashiv, and therefore this is what the Torah means. Mei achas. He needs to do a part, but a part has to have chashivas, has to have significance, has to have viability. So this is the shita of the Tanakam. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he's coming to add something. So he's writing this large word, and he begins, the first two letters are actually the same letters. They're two letters, they're the same character. He's also chayiv. Kigoyin, sheish, teis, ra, gag, chag. So all these things have meaning. Sheish means 6, teis means giving, ra is ooze, gag is a roof, chag is a bracelet. So Rashi will bring the examples of the psukim, where we have these words which are merely part of a larger word. So Rabbi Yehuda is coming to add, even if the two words are the same, they're identical letters that are being repeated, they are chayiv. Let's see Rashi inside. Rashi here is on the fourth line. Rabbi Yehuda comes to add, so he's writing a large word, and he only began writing that large word, and he only wrote they both have the same character. They're part of a large word. From Sheshvatzar, or Mesheshach, Sheshamim. So all these words begin with two shins, and he only wrote those first two letters, he is chayiv. Or he wrote the word teis from the word tisro, or titnu. The koshken, certainly Rashi says, if he intended on writing that small word initially, certainly he's chayiv. So Rabbi Yehuda here clearly tells us that even if they're both of the same letters, he is chayiv. This is going to be the stira, the contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda here and the Rabbi Yehuda and our Mishnah, who seem to tell us that only if that short word from that large word has a variety, two different types of characters, then it's chayiv, but not if they're the same identical letters. So this is the stira the Gemara is going to deal with it soon. Let's continue with the Bryce. Or Rabbi Yossi. This is the same Rabbi Yossi as we had in our Mishnah, who maintains that the concept of writing is not based on writing letters. Even a symbol, even a mark is sufficient, like in the Mishkan. Is he chayiv because of writing? He's chayiv because of marking, because that was the manner. They used to mark on the crushim of the Mishkan, Leida, to know Ezehi ben Zugai, to know which one is meant to be paired with the other one. Lefichach, says Rabbi Yossi Yechidish, even if he doesn't write letters, Lefichach sorat srita achas al shnei sinsaron. If he scrapes a scrape along two boards, or two scrapes on one board, chayiv, that is sufficient, that's considered to be kaisif. Reb Shimon Omer, now we have a fourth shita. He says like this, V'asa achas. This is back to that same pasuk, V'asa ma'achas me'ela. So he says, if the pasuk would have only said V'asa achas, Yochal ashichtev's kol hashem, Perhaps I would think that he needs to write the entire word, Asher Kala Beget, to weave the entire garment, Asher Yasis Kala Nafa, to fashion the entire sieve, Tamlayim Meyachas. Even partial is sufficient. If partial is sufficient, even one letter, he weaves one thread, or he only makes that one bias on the naf. It's not viable, it's not sustainable. The Pasuk says achas. So we seem to have that conflicting implication. Hakeitzad, once again, Reb Shimon here seems to be repeating word for word the Tanakama's words. The Gemara is going to explain soon what the point of contention is. It needs to be something which is viable. So it needs to be something of significance. And for instance, by the beget, it needs to be 2 threads, etc. So let's stop for a moment. We have 4 shittas here. We have a Tanakama who says, even a small portion of a large word is sufficient, provided that small word of 2 letters contains 2 different types of letters. Rabbi Yehuda adds, even if they're identical letters. Rabbi Yossi says, even markings are sufficient. Rabbi Shimon, we're not sure what he means. He's coming to dispute something. And the Gemara is going to explain soon what he's coming to add. Concludes the Brisa, Rabbi Yossi Eimer, Va'asa achas va'asa hena. The pasuk here says va'asa ma'achas mehena. Achas is a lashon yachid, a singular term, one, and hena is a plural term. Now, the word hena here seems to be superfluous. The pasuk could have simply said va'asa achas or me'achas. Why the word hena? So the pasuk is coming to teach us something. Sometimes it's one liability, and sometimes it's many liabilities. Pa'amim shechayv achas al kulam. On occasion, he'll be chayiv one chatas for all of them. And sometimes he'll be chayiv a separate chayiv for each separate malacha. The Gemara soon will explain the meaning of Rabbi Yossi. Now let's get back to the Brisa and to our stira on the Mishnah. At any rate, it says Rabbi Doimer, even if he merely writes 2 letters, and they're both of the same character. For instance, the word sheish from sheishach, chayiv. So this is a stira Mishnah where he says he's not chayiv unless there are 2 separate characters. It says in Malay Kash, it's not difficult. Hadi day. In our Mishnah, he was stating his own opinion, and he required those 2 letters to be of different natures. Hadi Rabbi, in the Brisa, he is saying over opinion of his Rabbi, of his teacher, the San, as we learned, Rabbi Doimer, Mishum Gamliel. Even if he writes those 2 letters, but even if they're the same shame, they're the same character, he's chayv kigoyin sheish teis rar gog chach. So it's no kasha. We have 2 different opinions being represented here. Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah is his own opinion. Rabbi Yehuda in the Brisa is his Rabbi Gamliel. Let's proceed analyzing the Brisa. Rabbi Shimon Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon tells us that even a partial word is sufficient. He seems to be mirroring the sheet of Tanakam Rabbi Yehuda, who says, Rabbi Yehuda tells us that even part of a word is sufficient, even if the small word contains 2 identical letters. So what is the difference here? What is the point of contention between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda? Says Rabbi Chitema, perhaps you'll say, we found something. Aleph. The Azrecha. The pasuk is in Yeshaya uses the word Azrecha, I will gird you. Perhaps if he's writing the word Azrecha, and he only ends up writing the first 2 letters, which is an Aleph and Aleph. Aleph have no meaning. It's not a viable word. Perhaps that is the point of difference here between Tanakama, between Rav Shimon, who says that he's not chayev, it has no meaning. It needs to be something that has meaning, that has definition. For instance, sheish, that's number 6. Taste, giving, rar, ooze, gag is a roof. So all those examples that Rabbi Yehuda mentioned have meaning. Whereas Rabbi Shimon perhaps doesn't require that. Even if he merely writes Aleph and Aleph, that is sufficient. The Tanakama Savar, Rabbi Yehuda holds Aleph, the Azrecha, le mechayiv, he's not chayiv on that. Rabbi Shimon Savar, he's chayiv. Why? Given the Isei, because it is found. Bigil Turi Ba'alma, these amulets. So they write all types of letters in there, and Aleph was something found in those amulets. So it has some symbolic significance it's used in somewhere in an amulet. So perhaps that is sufficient to give it significance, and therefore he's chayiv. Given the issa b'gul turva chayiv. So perhaps this is the point of machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Says the Gemara, how could you say that? How can you say Rabbi Shimon is being machmer, he's being stringent? L'meimer, Rabbi Shimon l'chumra. Are you going to propose that Rabbi Shimon is coming to be machmer here and say even in this case he's chayiv? V'hatanya, haven't we found the brisa just the opposite? Rabbi Shimon is actually very lenient. The brisa says as follows: Hakoideach kol shu chayiv. If one drills even a bit, Rashi says, meaning he didn't actually drill straight through to the other side of the wood, he's still chayiv. Hamegarer kol shu. If he scrapes, for instance, he has a parchment, and he scrapes it. He intended on doing the whole parchment. He only does a shear, which is actually kedei kamiyah, enough to use it for an amulet. So even if he does part of his job, hama'abed kol shu. Likewise, when it comes to tanning, he didn't do the entire thing that he had in mind to do. He only did part of it. He only did the shear, which is sufficient to be used for an amulet. Hatzor b'kli. Tzur kol shu is engraving some type of form in a kli, and he only does part of it. According to Tanakam, he's chayiv. So even though he intended on doing a full job, he only did a partial job, he is chayiv. Reb Shimon Omer, until he drills straight through it, he scrapes the entire thing, he tans the entire thing, until he engraves the entire engraving that he had in mind there, that he had in mind to do, let's say today, right? So this was his work day. He planned on doing this job. If he stops in the middle, and all these things, he'll be pater. Reb Shimon follows a person's plan, a person's intention. It's only considered to be a complete malacha if he does everything he had in mind to do today. So we see clearly that Reb Shimon is being makel. He's very lenient when it comes to this thing. So, meaning, if a person had in mind to write a full word, certainly Reb Shimon will not hold him liable if he only writes a partial word. So you can't even propose. Reb Shimon is going to hold that an aleph is sufficient. Reb Shimon will hold not only is an aleph not sufficient, even shin and shin, which have meaning, are not sufficient until he writes the entire word, which he intended on writing. Says the Gemara, we're going to have to reinterpret and figure out what is the point of contention between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon. Elo, Reb Shimon hasal hashmina. Reb Shimon is actually coming to teach us. He's only chayiv if he writes the entire word. Part of the word doesn't incur liability. So this indeed is the point of machlokes between Reb Shimon, who requires the entire word to be written, according to the other shittas. Even part of that word is sufficient. Says the Gemara, Umi motzas amasachi. How could you propose that according to Reb Shimon, he needs to write the entire word? V'atanya, haven't we learned in a brisa, Reb Shimon oimer, v'asa achas. This is going back to the pasuk of v'asa mei achas. Had the pasuk only written achas without that mem, yochel, I would think he's only chayiv until he writes achas, the entire word. That's what the pasuk teaches us. With that mem, mei achas, even part of that word is sufficient. So it's clear that according to Reb Shimon, he doesn't need to write the entire word to be chayiv. Says more Tritz answer and interpret as follows. You meant to read Reb Shimon's words as follows. Had the pasuk only said v'asa achas, I would think he's only chayiv until he writes the entire pasuk, entire verse that he had in mind to write. That's why the pasuk adds the mem to teach us. Even part of the pasuk is enough, but provided that he wrote an entire word. So let's make a quick summary of the 4 shittas we have regarding the melacha of kaiseb. According to Reb Shimon, he's chayiv only if he writes the entire word. According to Reb Yehuda and our Mishnah, which is actually compatible with the Tanakam and our Brisa, even a shem katan mishem gadol, even if he merely writes a small word of a larger word, he's chayiv, provided that that small word consists of 2 different letters. For instance, the letters shin and mem, shem, which were part of a larger word, Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda in the Brisa, actually, who is quoting his Rebbe, Rabbi Gamliel, he holds that even if that small word consists of the same 2 letters, identical letters, for instance, sheish, that is also considered to be a malacha. Rabbi Yossi, he holds that you don't even have to write letters, even 2 symbols, even 2 scrapes, 2 marks. That is also considered to be a malacha of kaisef. Continues the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi Omer, this is going back to the conclusion of the Brisa. Rabbi Yossi says, Va'asa achas va'asa heina. So the pasuk says, Va'asa me achas me heina. Achas is a singular term, Lashon Yachad. Heina is a Lashon Rabim. And we learn from here, Pa'amim shechayiv achas al kulam. On occasion, he will be chayiv one liability, one chatas, for all the malachas that he did. Upa'amim shechayiv al kol achas v'achas. And other times, he will be chayiv a separate chayiv for each malacha. The Gemara will explain. Rabbi Yossi, my time in Rabbi Yossi. What is the reason for Rabbi Yossi? Where did he get this from? Where did he expound? Where did he find this concept in this pasuk? Says the Gemara as follows: Achas me achas heina me heina. The pasuk says va'asa me achas me heina. Why does the pasuk say me achas? It could have said simply achas. Why did the pasuk say instead of achas me achas? And also, why does it also say heina? The pasuk simply could have sufficed with the word achas. Why me achas and why heina? Continues the Gemara, heina me heina. Likewise, why couldn't the pasuk simply say heina? Why did the pasuk say me heina and also add the word me achas? So we learn from these two mems, we learn something, and also from the fact that the Torah has these words achas and heina, we learn achashi heina. On occasion, he can do something which appears merely as one transgression, and he will be liable for many. Ve'heina sheyachas. On occasion, it can appear as if he's doing many things, many averis, many malachas, and it will turn out that he only has one liability. Heina. It appears like many liabilities, but it really turns out sheyachas. It only turns out with one liability. Explains the Gemara. Let's go back to the mems. Achas, if it only says v'asa achas, that's Shimon. He does the entire word. So if he writes the word Shimon, he would be chayiv. Me'achas is coming to teach you shame is Shimon. Even if he merely writes shame from the word Shimon, that is sufficient. Let's go to the next word. Heina. Heina is the avos, the primary malachas. Me'heina, which means it comes, they are derived from the avos. That is referring to the tolis, the derivatives. Let's move on. Achas she'heina. It looks like he's merely transgressing one, but he is liable for many. What is this speaking about? Zodein Shabbos v'shigas malachas. He did many malachas b'shgog inadvertently on one Shabbos, but he knew that today was Shabbos. As far as Shabbos was concerned, it was deliberate. He was aware of the fact that today was Shabbos. It was Zodein Shabbos v'shigas malachas, but he was unaware about the significance of these malachas. In this case, even though it appears perhaps like one bundle, it was on one Shabbos. It's achas. Nevertheless, shehi heina. This will interpret itself in many chiyuv, many liabilities, translate in many chatois, because each malacha was a separate shgaga. Continues the Gemara, heina sheyachas. What does that mean? It appears as though he did many, he transgressed many, but it will result in merely one liability, shigigas Shabbos, v'zadar malachis. We're speaking about he did many malachis on one Shabbos. Now the shgaga, the inadvertence, the unawareness pertained to the Shabbos itself. He was unaware today is Shabbos. He knew these things are malachis, but he's unaware of the fact that today is Shabbos. So therefore, even though he did many malachis, it was heina, many, but shehi achas. It only translates into one chiyuv because they're all rooted in one shgaga and one unawareness. The fact that today was Shabbos, that he didn't know. Therefore, there's only one chiyuv for all of them. So all these four things we learn from this pasuk. Let's make a quick recap. We have the pasuk va'asa ma'achas meheina. From the mem of me'achas we learn even shame from the word Shimon. From the meheina we learn the teiladis. Achas, shehiena, one that turns out into many. That is speaking about shigas malachas. He knew today was Shabbos, unaware of the fact that these are malachas. So although it all took place on one Shabbos, he brings many chatois, one per malacha. And we have the same in the reverse. Heina, it appears like many, shehiachas, but only results in one. Speaking about he was unaware today was Shabbos, shigas Shabbos. So all his malachas are based on one single unawareness. They're rooted in the shigas Shabbos. So therefore, he only brings one chatas. Continues the Gemara. Omar B'Yehuda, Matzina Shem Kotem Shem Gadol. Rabbi Yehuda taught us that we found this small word from the large word. So if he intended on writing Shimon and he merely wrote Shem, Matzinu Shem Gadol Shem Gadol, we found that even a small word from a large word, there is chiv on that, there's liability, because it has meaning, it has viability. Shame, it's one of Noach's children. So it has meaning. Says the Gemara, Mi dami, how could you compare? Mem the shame sasam. The mem in the short word Shem is a closed mem, because it's the last letter of that word. Mem de Shimon Pasuach. But when he's writing Shimon, what type of mem is he using? He's using an open mem. So when he stops short after that open mem, how can you hold him liable for doing a malach for writing the word Shem, which requires a closed mem? It's not a viable word. It has no meaning. We learn from here, Sosam, when he needs to write a closed mem, instead he writes an open mem. Kosher, so this will be kosher, for instance, if written in Sefer Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzahs. So the fact that we see that in halacha, these two things are interchangeable, so we regard it as valid, as viable, and therefore in our case is chayiv. Meisvei, we have a kasha from our brayso, which seems to tell us otherwise. If he mixes things around, it's not valid. The pasuk says uchsavtam. This is the pasuk by in Krishma. He meant to write the tefillin and the mezuzah. Uchsav tam. What do we learn from here? Sheitehei chsiva tamma. It has to be a perfect writing. For instance, shlo yichtav. The Bible gives us a whole list of different letters that perhaps sound alike or look alike, etc. The Bryce is telling us that you meant to write a perfect writing. Don't mix things up. Don't change letters. Shlo yichtav alfin. He shouldn't write, instead of the alfin, he shouldn't write einin, even though they sound alike. Don't mix up the aleph with the ayin. Einin shouldn't be turned into alfin. Basin shouldn't be turned into kafin. So instead of dividing the base, he should write a kaf, although they look alike. Kafin should not be turned into basin. So these are all plural ways of calling these letters. Gamin is referring to the gimel. Should not be turned into tzadin, into tzadiks. Tzadin should not be turned into gamin. Dalsin is referring to the dalis. They should not be turned into reish, into reishin. Oration should not be turned into dalsin. Heyin should not be turned into chesen. Chesen into heyin. Vavin into yud. Yud into vavin. Zayin into nun. Nun into zayin. Tesin into peifin. Zapei. Or peifin, peis should not be turned into tesin, into tesses. Kfufin, the letters that are meant to be bent over, should not be pshuta, should not be turned into straight letters. For instance, the kaf which is meant to be bent over, don't turn into a straight kaf. Or in the reverse, pshutit, when we're meant to write the long, straight kaf, don't write kfuf in the bent kaf. Don't turn memin into samachin, or samachin into mem, stumin, psuchin. Don't turn a letter which is meant to be a closed letter, like that closed mem at the end of the word, don't turn into psuchin, into open letter. Psuchin, open letters, don't turn them into stumin, into closed letters. Parsha psucha, an open chapter. So these are halachas that there are different types of writing the parshas of the Torah. Some of them are called psuchim, written in a manner which are called open. Don't turn them into closed parshas. Lo yasen a stuma, a closed parsha. Lo yasen a psucha, don't make her into an open parsha. So don't switch things around. Write exactly as you meant to write. The Brisa concludes, Kosva Kashira. If he writes the ordinary words of the Torah, Kashira, the way the shira, the songs of the Torah are written in a specific fashion with a certain spacing. So if he writes the ordinary parsha of the Torah in the matter of a shira, of a song, or in the reverse, or he writes the shira, which is meant to be written in a specific fashion, and he writes it in an ordinary manner, or he didn't use ink. He wrote using a different substance. He wanted to be elaborate, so he wrote the askaris, the shemas of Hashem, using gold. Harei elu yigonzu. They should be hidden. So apparently, it's puzzle. Anything that's done incorrectly invalidates it, including switching the open letters with the closed letters. Says the Gemara, Hu de Amar Kihatan. Rabbi Yehuda tells us that it's insignificant. It's okay to switch the open and the closed. He's following the opinion of the following Tana, the Sani, as well as the Rabbi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, never b'sheini even ischem. So the pasuk here is speaking about the nesachim, the pourings of the wine by the karbanos of Sukkos. So on the second day of Sukkot, instead of merely writing v'niska, the pasuk said v'niskehem, adding the extra mem. B'shishi, on the sixth day of the Yom Tov, it says u'nisacheha, adding an extra yud. B'shvi, on the seventh day, it says k'mishpatam, like their laws. So we have an extra mem at the end again. So we have a drush, harei, we have an extra mem and a yud and a mem. Harei mem yud mem, mayim. That alludes to water. Mikan remes. Here we have a remes, an allusion. L'nisach hamayim in our Torah. We have an allusion from the Torah remes to the concept of pouring water on Sukkot by the karbanos. So here we see that this brisa reads the word mayim from three letters which are not exactly the way Mayim is meant to be written, because he compiled the mem from V'niskeim on the second day of Sukkot. That was a closed mem, and nevertheless he used it as a remes from Mayim, which requires an open mem. The first letter of Mayim is open mem, so apparently it's okay. Says the fact that the Brisa indicates that an open mem, which was made into a closed mem, kosher, is kosher, because the fact is that he uses that closed mem for a remez of Mayim, which requires an open mem. So just as that in that direction, it is kosher, it is valid. Sasum nami. Likewise, when we need a closed mem, sasum v'asa besuach, and he made it into an open mem, kosher, it too is valid. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda al Mishnah, who's working with the premise that the closed mem of the word shame, even though it was written as an open mem, because he was writing Shimon, Shin and an open mem, nevertheless we can use that open mem and apply it to the word shame, which needs a closed mem, because a closed mem which was made open is kosher. Just as we find it's valid when it comes to the Sefer Torah, apparently it has meaning, it's viable, has significance, and therefore it's considered to be a malacha. Okay, time for a brief review of today's daf. We began with the Mishnah telling us that if one does a malacha, even a partial malacha, but it has kiyum, it's considered to be viable, it's considered to be something which some people would just leave it as is, that has chashiva, is considered to be a malacha. And the Gemara told us that we're coming to include a case where he carves out, he takes this block which is meant to contain a full kav, and he merely carves out a cavity to contain 3/4 of a kav. Since some would just leave it as is, that is considered to be a malacha. The Gemara proceeded with Rav Shimon Gamliel telling us that if one takes his hammer and blows it at the anvil, at this block of metal, he is chayiv, because in the Mishkan they would do that. So Rav Shimon Gamliel is speaking about a case where he is flattening out this plate of gold, and as the Gemara Rashi describes that they used to do a few blows, 3 blows on the gold, and then alternate go back to the metal to flatten out, smooth out the bottom of this hammer. So if he's doing it part of his malacha process, that is considered to be a malacha makav patish. He's smoothing out, he's fixing up his hammer, and according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, that is regarded as a malacha makav patish. The Mishnah and the Gemara proceeded by telling us that if a person is chayrish, he plows even a koshu, he's chayiv because it is suitable for planting of one seed. We learned that if one gathers wood, branches, grass, endives, reeds, then it all depends what he's doing. If it is for the sake of human consumption, la'achila, then we work with a shear of gegeres, if it equals the amount of a dried fig. If it is for animal feed, then we work with a shear, which fills the mouthful of a goat. If it is for fuel purposes, then the shear is the amount that's sufficient to cook up the egg. And if it is improving the karka, then we work with a shear of koshu. We learned about the malacha v'kosev, where it needs to be at least 2 letters. We have 4 shitas. According to Reb Shimon, he's only chayiv if he writes the entire letter that he had in mind. According to Reb Yehuda in the Mishnah, even if he merely wrote a part of that larger word, for instance, he intended writing Shimon and he merely wrote the letters Shin and Mem, he's chayiv. The Gemara told us because according to Reb Yehuda, an open and a closed mem are interchangeable. Therefore, this word shame has viability, has meaning. Rabbi Yehuda in the Brisa, which was actually the name of his Rebbe, Rav Gamliel, told us that even if this small word, which is a part of the large word, even if this small word is comprised of 2 identical letters, he is chayiv. Rabbi Yossi tells us that for the malacha of kaisev, you don't even need to write letters, even a symbol, even a mark, even a scrape. So 2 scrapes are considered to be kaisev, because in the Mishkan they would make the marks on those krushim to know which one is meant to be positioned near the other.